Hello, my name is Dr. Gwen Martin. I am an instructor with Ball State University, and today we are going to go over experimental design. Now, when we talk about experimental designs in applied behavior analysis, we are referring to the single subject research designs. Now, a question that I've often been asked is, does the single subject research designs refer to the number of subjects? And the answer to that is no. The single subject research designs is actually in reference to the fact that the subject acts as his or her own control versus having two separate groups as you would in a group design. That is a treatment group and a control group. In a single subject research design, there can definitely be more than one subject in the study. The cause and effect, or evidence of a functional relationship, comes from the repeated exposure to the treatment. Through the repeated exposure, the experimenter can directly assess if the changes in the dependent variable are in fact caused by exposure to the independent variable or the treatment. You will hear me refer to the intervention as the treatment or the treatment as the intervention. You'll hear me use those terms interchangeably. But I'm referring to the treatment, the independent variable. There are 4 single subject research designs that I want to discuss. Originally, I was going to do 4 separate PowerPoints, but I think it's a little better to introduce all 4 of these together so that you can have the opportunity to compare them and see how they are similar or how they are different. So the 4 that we're going to discuss are the withdrawal or the ABAB design, the alternating treatment design, the changing criterion design, and the multiple baseline design. Let's start with withdrawal. So ABAB is actually a variation of the withdrawal design. The ABAB design examines the effects of an intervention by alternating the baseline condition with the intervention condition repeatedly. So basically you have baseline, intervention again. Now, if you are not familiar with baseline and intervention, what those 2 conditions entail, I encourage you to go back and review that material in the course. Now, as I said earlier, ABAB is a variation of or type of withdrawal design, but there are other variations as well. You can have a BAB design, which would be your intervention, baseline intervention. You can have an ABA design, ABAB design. You can even have an ABC design. Now, in that case, there are 2 separate interventions, which is what the B and the C is in reference to. Now, what makes this different from an alternating treatment design, which we will discuss later, is that in an ABC design, there is still a return to baseline. So as you can see, the A in there, you have baseline intervention 1, intervention 2, baseline 2, intervention again, the 2 interventions again. So those are variations of the withdrawal design. The effects of the intervention in an ABAB design are clear if the target behavior changes based on the implementation and withdrawal of the intervention. So let's look at a graph. I think it would be helpful to see a graph to explain these a little bit better. If you follow the cursor, as you can see, we start out with baseline, intervention, baseline, intervention. And again, if any of this is unfamiliar, I encourage you to go back and review the material in your course. This is a graph, of course, and this is our phase change line or our condition change line, and each of these are conditions. So you have your baseline condition, your intervention condition, your baseline condition, and then your intervention condition again. You will see that in baseline, the frequency of the inappropriate comments was quite high. It was between 10 to 12. And then when intervention was implemented, it dropped to, let's see, a range of 2 to 5. And when intervention was withdrawn and they were taken back to baseline, it increased again. And then when intervention was implemented again, the behavior decreased again. So you can see that the behavior changed as a result of implementation of the intervention. There are strengths and limitations within ABAB design. I'm not going to list them all, but I am going to give you a few. One of the great strengths of an ABAB design is the effects of the intervention are very clear via visual inspection. You can very easily see changes in level, trend, and the latency of the change. If we go back to that graph, it's very easy to see that there's definitely a change in the target behavior based on the implementation and withdrawal of the intervention. You can see that just by looking at it. Let's go back. Limitations of an AB design. Can't show a true reversal of the behavior. One of the biggest limitations, I feel, is the ethical concerns of removing the intervention. Sometimes when you use an ABAB design and say you start out with your baseline, you implement your intervention and the behavior changes for the better, and then you remove the intervention and the behavior goes back to the way it was or it gets worse. There's that ethical concern of putting the subject or your client back in the situation to exhibit the problem behavior. You know, if it worked, then we want to see our clients, our subjects get better and do better. And there's that ethical consideration of removing intervention and taking away what was helping them. So there's always that ethical concern. And then sometimes it's difficult to completely remove treatment or the intervention. And I see this the most in cases where there is a knowledge component to the treatment or the intervention. You know, once you teach something, it's hard to unteach it. Once you impart knowledge, it's hard to take away that knowledge. So when you get to the condition where you are withdrawing the intervention, you can't really completely withdraw the intervention because, like I said, once you've taught something, it's taught. So again, those are just some strengths and limitations of an AB withdrawal design. Now, earlier I made reference to the alternating treatment design. The alternating treatment design examines the effects of an intervention by rapidly altering two or more interventions. The intervention can be implemented on alternating days, on the same day but different sessions or times, or during the same session. And you will hear an alternating treatment design be referred to as a multi-element design. The effects of the intervention are clear if the target behavior changes during implementation of the corresponding intervention. So let's look at a graph to give us a better idea. Now, this is a graph that I pulled off the internet, and you can tell that it's of a functional analysis, but it's still a good representation of what an alternating treatment design graph would look like. Over here, you have your different treatments or conditions, and as you can see, they were implemented on during alternating sessions. So you've got your alone, attention, escape, and control, and all of these were implemented. However, you can see that the behavior responded best to the escape condition, because you see that there is a higher number of responses during the escape condition or the escape intervention versus, for example, during the attention condition or the attention intervention. So again, as you can see that it was implemented, it says sessions days. However, the x-axis, However, the x-axis is labeled, but you can see that it was implemented on alternating days or alternating sessions, but all done at simultaneously. And that's the big thing with an alternating treatment design, is that the interventions are implemented simultaneously versus doing one first, watching a change in the behavior, withdrawing, and then implementing another one. Strengths and limitations with an alternating treatment design. Strengths, the design does not depend on the withdrawal of the intervention, which is great. So you avoid the ethical concern there. Decreases possibility of sequence effects, and quicker to compare the effects of the intervention. Because again, if we go back and look at that graph, you can see immediately how the different interventions or conditions affected the target behavior. Versus, again, if we had done a baseline, then intervention 1, intervention 2, intervention 3, intervention 4. This is a quicker way to compare it. Limitations are multiple treatment interference and discriminability of treatment, basically the effects on your subject. Sometimes it may be hard to tell, which treatment is actually affecting the behavior when you are implementing multiple treatments simultaneously. And then also, from the subject's perspective, for them to be able to discriminate between which intervention is being implemented at which time. The subject has to be able to discriminate between those two so that they can respond appropriately and you can see the varying effects. The third that I want to talk about is a multiple baseline design. Now, this is actually my favorite. The multiple baseline design examines the effects of an intervention by assessing change across 2 or more baselines. The goal is to repeat the changes to the behavior across baselines in the same direction. A multiple baseline design can be implemented across behaviors, people, or settings. The effects of the intervention are clear if the target behavior changes in the same manner and direction across baselines. And again, let's look at a graph to get a better idea of what I'm talking about here. So as you can see, this is a multiple baseline. It looks like across subjects or across people because we have Tim here. We have another person down here. We're looking at the frequency of inappropriate comments. So that's one behavior. Class sessions, that's one setting. So we're looking at 2 different consumers or 2 different subjects. And in a multiple baseline design, you are going to start collecting baseline on both subjects, both people at the same time. Once your baseline data is stable, and if you follow the cursor here, once your baseline data is stable for the first subject, then you begin intervention for the first subject, but you continue baseline for the second subject. Once your intervention data is stable for the first subject, then you start intervention for the second subject. And as I said earlier, if you can see the effects of the intervention are clear if the target behavior changes in the same manner and direction across baseline. So once intervention is implemented, you can see that the behavior changes in the same manner. It drastically drops for both, and in the same direction. It decreases for both in the same direction. So that's where you're seeing where, okay, this intervention is, there's a functional relationship here, that the intervention is high probability that it is causing the change in the behavior. We're going to go back to this graph for a second. And remember, it doesn't just have to be 2. It's 2 or more. And you can have a multiple baseline across people, across settings, and across behaviors. Strengths and limitations to a multiple baseline. Again, the design does not depend on the withdrawal of the intervention. So again, you avoid that ethical dilemma. And the intervention is applied to one subject, one behavior, or one setting at a time. Now, limitations are the interdependence of the different baseline. That is, change in one baseline may affect another baseline, inconsistent effects across baseline, prolonged baselines. As you can see, for example, here, it took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 data points before the intervention was implemented for the second participant. There are situations sometimes where the data is there's such a high variability in the data that it takes a while to get a trend or to get stable data, and until you do, you can't implement intervention for the second participant. So sometimes that baseline can continue and continue and continue before you can finally implement it. Beginning for one subject is dependent on another subject. So, those are just some concerns or weaknesses, limitations to a multiple baseline design. The last one that I want to discuss is the changing criterion design. The changing criterion design examines the effects of an intervention by changing the mastery criteria in increments. The effects of the intervention are clear if the target behavior changes in the proposed direction across criteria and over the course of the intervention. So let's look at a changing criterion graph here. You can see that we start with baseline, and then the criteria changes as you go. And once, if you follow the cursor, once the subject reaches mastery or makes the criteria, he's moved up to the next one, and the expectation changes. Moved up to the next one, and the expectation or the criteria changes. And it continues until the final criteria is met. The final criterion is met. Strengths and limitations to a changing criterion design. Again, the design does not depend on the withdrawal of the intervention. And the intervention is applied gradually across the life of the intervention. Limitations are changes in the target behavior can be too rapid between criterion, and number and magnitude of criterion shifts. I like the changing criterion design. I'll go back to the graph while I talk about this. It's nice to use when you're working on, say, a behavior that that has a very, very high frequency, and it's hard or impossible to decrease that to zero. So, or it may be hard on the consumer to have that expectation for it to go down to zero. So decreasing it in increments can sometimes be a better clinical decision, and using a changing criterion design would be the best method of doing that. So you have these amazing experimental designs, these amazing single subject research designs. How do you choose? The type of design chosen depends on the experimental question. It also depends on the behavior. It depends on your subject. It depends on the amount of time that you have. There are a lot of things that go into choosing which experimental design that you're going to choose. So, for example, let's say that Gwen has a theory that eating a banana before class will result in a decrease in physical aggression for students. Now, looking at this particular situation, which type of experimental design do you think would work best out of the ones that we have discussed? Perhaps an ABAB design or a multiple baseline design. I say ABAB design because then you could have, I want to see if eating a banana will decrease physical aggression. I want to see if there's a functional relationship between the two. So I start out with baseline, where I don't give my student a banana. And then I give them a banana. I withdraw, take the banana away to see if the behavior is going to change. And then I give the banana back to see if it will go back to the way it was in the first intervention. Now, again, I said you choose based on the behavior, based on your time you have, your consumer, your experimental question. This would meet all of that except for one. I would have a concern about using this with physical aggression, because physical aggression is one of those behaviors that if I find something that works ethically, I probably don't want to remove the intervention if in fact it decreases, especially given the intensity and the severity of the physical aggression. If the intervention works and it's a behavior that there's the intensity is pretty severe, I wouldn't want to remove the intervention if it worked, if I saw a change in a positive direction. So again, you want to look at all of those aspects when you're choosing. So maybe a multiple baseline would be better, because if you read this again, you'll see that I said for students. So perhaps I could implement this intervention across students. Say I have 3 students. I have Daniel, Abigail, and Sam. So I would start with 1. I would collect baseline on all 3, and then I would give the banana to the first student. And once I see a decrease and I see stable data, then I would give it to the second one, and then to the third. And that would probably be a better choice for this particular situation. So when you're trying to figure out which design to use, you want to take all of those aspects into consideration. You want to look at, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it is important to choose a design that fits with the situation. You wouldn't want to do an ABAB design with self-injurious behaviors. If you implemented an intervention that decreased a self-injurious behavior, especially one, again, with high intensity and really pretty bad severity, you wouldn't want to withdraw that intervention. That would be a huge, huge ethical concern. So, if you're working with self-injurious behaviors, then maybe ABAB design wouldn't be your first choice. Maybe you want to look at something else. So you want to look at the behavior. You want to look at the subject, how much time you have. There's a difference between if I'm doing one-to-one therapy with someone and I have the ability to have multiple sessions in a day, 5 to 7 days a week, versus if I'm in a school system and I only see a student once a week, or only have access to them 30 minutes a day, one time each day. Your experimental question, your subject, you want to take all of that into consideration. So I hope this was helpful. A good introduction and review of the experimental designs. As always, if you have questions or would like to discuss any of these further, please do not hesitate to contact your instructor. That's what we are here for. And lastly, I want to give you my references. Of course, your Cooper book, the single case research designs, methods for clinical and applied settings, is an awesome resource to get more detailed information about the different experimental designs. Again, I hope this was helpful. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.